Just for background, I was involved uh, with the Revenue Neutral Rate Committee for GST starting in 2015. So, when finally the government pulled the trigger on the implementation of GST in 2015-16, uh, out of curiosity, my colleague and I, when we were still at Credit Suisse, started to assess, uh, given that there were some 45 different rates that were being subsumed into GST, what would be the average rate of GST? And so using some basic calculations, we arrived at a certain number. And then I took it to the then Chief Economic Advisor, Dr. Arvind Subramanian, and said, Arvind, this is what we have been calculating. Do you think this makes sense? And he said, whoa, no one in the government seems to be thinking about this yet. And then very shortly after that, the Revenue Neutral Rate Committee was set up, and Arvind was kind enough to sort of ask me to join as an advisor. So over the next year or so, a very fascinating group of bureaucrats led by Arvind, and of course there was Dr. Kavita Rao from NIPFP, who had also done a parallel exercise on how revenue neutrality should be calculated. So we kept doing a lot of work. Finally, when the first GST Council meeting came, we had our recommendations. So we had suggested that there should be one rate or at most two rates. But we were very disappointed when the GST Council adopted a huge number of rates. So there was something at 0.1%, something at 1%, something at 3%, something at 5, 12, and 18, and 28. So there was, I think, the disconnect for the bureaucracy and the GST Council at that time was that the calculations done by both Dr. Kavita Rao and our team, and finally what came out in the report of the R&R committee, was that there were too many assumptions made and the calculations were perhaps too complicated. And what they sought was item-wise revenue neutrality. So what they decided to do was, because while there were 45 different taxes across states that were being subsumed in GST, the two big taxes were the value-added taxes, which were the sales taxes at the very state levels, and the excise duty, which was levied on production at the central level. And what emerged out of this was that, and generally, the VAT used to be, in some states at 4, 5, 6%, and then there was another one at about 12%. Same with excise. So there was some products at 5, 6%, 6%, and some at 12%. So what they decided was that things that were at 0 and 6 would get combined into a 5% slab. The 6 and 6 would get combined into a 12% slab. The 6 and 18, or 6 and 12 would get combined into an 18% slab. And the items that were at high VAT and high excise, that is 12 and 12, would compound into a 28% slab. And then I'll come to the compensation cess calculations. So instead of targeting one rate, which we call the revenue neutral rate, or two rates, a high and a low rate, the council chose to go with what I call item-wise revenue neutrality. That if you are trying to get effectively the same amount of tax as you were collecting earlier, you end up with effectively revenue neutrality. So the biggest fear for the government at that time was that it would create massive disruptions in the fiscal math. So thankfully, after about 8 years of GST, the GST Council got the confidence to actually target effectively a two-rate structure, but there is also a sin rate, which is a third rate. So I think what gave confidence to the government and the GST Council in proceeding with this was that they figured that 70 to 75% of the GST was being collected in the 18% slab. Only 5 to 6% was being collected in the 12% slab. 13 to 15% of GST was being collected in the 28% slab. Now, what they did was they cancelled out these two rates. So 12% and 28% were removed, and we end up with 5 and 18. What has also happened over a period of time is that, so as you can see, the Subramanian committee that I mentioned earlier had recommended about a 15% GST rate. The effective, because in the first few years of the implementation of GST, the rates kept getting cut. So, and as you can imagine, when you are setting rates on something which is as complex as the Indian economy, the number of items, the number of services, the goods, and then there is the input tax credit, what is exempt, what is not. All of that complexity meant that there was a lot of to and fro in the first few years. So you can see rates were progressively falling. So in May 17, when things really took off, average rate was about 14%. By in November, there had been a phase of pay cut of rates cuts to the rates. The rates kept getting cut, and by December 18, we had already come down below 12%. So there was a substantial reduction in rates. More than just the reduction in rates, I think the discomfort among senior policymakers, including the Honorable Prime Minister, was that why are we changing rates so frequently? And after that, there was a period of relative stability. So you can see that there was not much of a change for the next 5 years. Of course, some part of this period was also COVID, where the changes were perhaps not necessary because there was so much disruption going on anyway. What is now going to happen is that from about 11.3% before these changes, we will end up at about 10.3%. So this is an extremely low effective rate. What it does is it more than just the fiscal stimulus, and we will discuss that. It also, if you read about the Laffer curve, so the lower the rates are, the better the collection. So despite this reduction in effective rates, so say from 14% in May 17 to say 11.3% in FY23, the GST collections as a percentage of GDP actually inched up a bit. So it did not rise a lot, but so despite what you would think was a nearly 25-30% reduction in rates, because of improving compliance, so as you bring down rates, your compliance starts to go up. The rates, the overall tax collection as a percentage of GDP remained intact. Our expectation is that the same should hold true as we move from the 11.3 effective to about 10.3 effective. Now, what has happened with almost all the items moving from 28 to 18 is that you lose about 5% of the revenue. So the way to calculate that is that you have on average, say 14% of your taxes were being collected, GST was being collected in this slab. You lose 10%. So if you move everything from 18 to 28, so you have 10 by 28 into 14, and that's about 5% of total GST. You have in the 12% slab, so let's take an average of 6 here. So this is 6 into 7 by 12, so 3.5%. So you lose about 8.5% of your taxes, which is how that 11.3 becomes 10.3. The stimulus, so this is how the calculation has been done. And so you can see that, what is the share of revenue, how the calculation is done. So you can see of the 1.8 trillion at the headline level, and we have assumed that there will be some items that don't, and therefore that 1.8 becomes 1.5. But these are the major items. So out of that 1.8 trillion rupees or 1800 billion rupees, or if you want to go in crores, 1.8 lakh crores, about 70,000 crores is items moving from the 12% slab to the 5% slab. There is about 25,000 crores, which is saved in cement. There is about 25,000 crores saved in small cars, about 7,500 in large cars, about 14,000 crores in two-wheelers, 900 crores in commercial vehicles, and in the rest, including other durables like air conditioners and consumer durables, there is about 37,600 crores, or 376 billion rupees. The discontinued slabs, as you can see, so these are the so as you can see, most of these are packaged food. So there is this view, and so I want to, I mean, instead of going through exact details of each of these categories, the point I want to make here is that the likelihood of some of these sectors getting fully formalized is now very high. So, so what we are likely to see is that things like dairy, where earlier the GST slabs were very high. So if you were and given that dairy generally works with very thin margins, very low margins, the apprehension for anyone who was not running a factory was that if I try to formalize it by a machine and do it formally, I'll have to pay higher tax. So now that those taxes are close to zero, at max 5% in some cases, it means that sectors like dairy and food processing are likely to get formalized very quickly, sometime in the next 3 to 5 years, and we could see a very high degree of formalization. What this will mean is, and this is how the Laffer curve also starts to work, is that wherever there's a marginal amount of say 5% tax to be collected, the volumes of goods that are providing that would of course improve a lot. As you can imagine, things like ACs, dishwashers. In fact, there were many construction goods. Like if you were say doing interiors in someone's house, a lot of the fixtures, fittings, all of them for some reason were at 28%. And that 28% being such a high slab, it led to a lot of cash market activity, meaning people would deliberately pay in cash to spare themselves the 28% charge. As these rates fall, the likelihood of these businesses choosing at the margin, I'm not saying that 100% this will move to a build kind of structure, but the likelihood that something like this moves is the percentage of people using formal bills and actually ending up paying 18% will be way higher than the number of people who are willing to pay at 28%. So that's how the Laffer curve works. And again, we expect that the headline revenue loss of about 1.5 or 1.8 lakh crores will be offset by the changes in terms of formalization and adoption. So some sectors get fully formalized, some sectors move a lot more towards formalization. What is also very interesting in this in these changes that we are seeing is that you see the state's opinion on various goods also changing. So imagine that when you are that the state felt that small cars were a luxury good. This is a legacy of the first few decades after independence. In fact, if you read Mr. R.C. Bhargav's book, Impossible to Possible, where he narrates the history of the first, of course, the whole period of Maruti's growth, but the attitude of the government, the approach of the government in the first few years of Maruti, which started in 1980, that it was considered a luxury good, and the government was not particularly focused in pushing its volumes. Now that small cars have moved to 18%, it suggests that the state, the government's, the governance infrastructure now sees cars not as a luxury good. They do see the larger cars, the luxury cars as luxury good, which they should, I guess. But the basic small cars are seen as widespread and necessary. And I think moving, or even two-wheelers for that matter, I think the improvements can be in adoption can be quite significant. There is if you plot do a scatter plot, and I'm assuming most people on this call can relate to that, what a scatter plot is. So on the x-axis, if you plot prices, if you're on the y-axis, you plot volumes, what you will find is that the volume growth and price growth, that is, what you will find is that categories where price growth is very high, the extreme example being cigarettes, in the last 20 years, there's been barely any volume growth. Because every time the excise duties go up, retail prices go up. And that's the attempt of the government. They keep maximizing their tax collection, and they don't let the volumes grow, which is, I think, good for people's health. On the other extreme, used to be things like toothpaste. Of course, toothpaste also have seen some price increases in the last 3-4 years. But because the prices were not going up, there was very strong improvement in penetration. So 95% of people now use toothpaste in India. Now, if you use the same metric, the fact that there is 8 to 9% decline in the prices of two-wheelers, the prices of cars, it actually suggests that the penetration should actually start to improve. The second big message in this whole piece is the fact that branded goods are no longer seen as luxury items. So again, the fact that most of the FMCG, what they say, fast-moving consumer goods products have actually moved from 18% to 5%, is a sign that the government, which earlier felt, or at least the GST Council, which earlier felt, or the state infrastructure, which earlier felt that having branded toothpaste or having branded detergent was somehow warranted a high rate. Now they've understood that, sorry, now even a very large percentage of households today use branded stuff or aspire to use branded stuff, and therefore bringing down the rates to 5%. So as much as it is a fiscal measure in terms of stimulus, as much as it is about simplification, it is also, I think, a very strong message in terms of how the state perceives various forms of consumption. The next question that comes is who's going to pay for it? Because if there is 0.4%, 0.5% of GDP worth of stimulus that is going through, who's going to pay for it? So and this may be a bit complicated, especially for those who are not used to fiscal arithmetic. So I'll try to simplify it, but I'm happy to answer this further in questions. It's a very interesting concept. So to do this, let me first explain what is a compensation cess. When GST was being implemented about 8 years back, the preceding tax structure used to be a lot about benefiting producer states versus consumer states. So to give you perspective, states like Tamil Nadu, Gujarat, Maharashtra, these are states which are manufacturing powerhouses. And then there are states like, say, in Odisha or a UP or a Bihar, which are more seen as a consumer state. So while Odisha and Bihar, Jharkhand also have factories, but by and large, net they're consumer states. Now, because GST is a consumption tax, so the structure that existed earlier was that factories paid excise, and when things crossed state borders, there was something called CST, a central sales tax that was levied. It tells you how complicated the whole structure was. Now, the states that were manufacturer states felt that they would lose revenue when we transition to GST. Now, given the complexity of this whole thing, that earlier there was a separate services tax, service tax. Now, service tax becomes, and it could be taken as an input tax credit. So there were many other simplifications, and therefore it is very hard for people to predict. As I explained earlier, when we did the revenue neutrality calculation, the GST Council felt that there were too many assumptions made, and therefore they went for itemized revenue neutrality. Similarly, on compensation, so the states that were big producer states felt that they would be losing revenue. And what if they lost revenue? And given that the GST Council requires 75% of the votes for any decision to be taken, you needed all the states to be, or almost all the states to be on the side. And the good thing is that so far the GST Council, in nearly all the decisions they've taken by consensus. That's an excellent approach to have. So to get the states, the producer states, to be on board and lose their apprehension that they would lose revenue, the center promised that we will pay you compensation in case your revenues fall short. So what they said was that, look, if in the previous year you had got 100 rupees, we will make sure that every subsequent year you are at 100 rupees grows at 14% CAGR. So that this was a guaranteed level of revenue for every state. So if your GST collections are more than that, then you don't need any compensation. But suppose in the first year you got 112, we'll make sure that we'll give you the extra 2, so that there is a 14%. And as you can imagine, the power of compounding, so 14% compounded over 5 years led to very high levels of revenue promise. Now, so how would the government pay for this? So what they did was they created this thing called the compensation cess. Now, the compensation cess was that because they had 5, 12, 18, 28 as the basic tax rates, basic slabs, the things that were where effective tax rates used to be higher, like say sugary drinks, luxury cars, the government started to levy extra cess on that. So therefore, in small cars, for example, the GST rate was 28%, but there was an extra 1% to 3% cess. And so the effective rate was 29 to 31%. In mid-sized cars, the effective rate could be as high as 45%, because the rest was all cess. And for large cars, it was nearly 50%. Luxury cars, it was nearly 50%. So the extra amount was collected as cess. So this number was, as you can see on the left, the GST compensation cess collected this year was expected to be 1.7 trillion rupees, so 1.7 lakh crores, 1,700 billion rupees. So in the first few years, as you can see, the GST collections were quite robust. The compensation cess that had to be paid out, so the burgundy columns here are the cess transferred to states. So the cess transferred was actually equal to or less than the cess collected. But as you got to FY20, because of the compounding nature of the promise made, the compensation requirements started to shoot up. Now, here also, you could see there was some money saved from FY19, which was then utilized in FY20. But by the time you got to this level, FY21, you could see that you were collecting only about 800 billion rupees or 80,000 crores, but your compensation cess requirement was 1.3 lakh crores. So when you combined all of this, the center was effectively borrowing from the future to make sure that it honored its promise of 14% CAGR growth for the various states. Now, FY20, so and constitutionally, the compensation cess was supposed to end in the 5th year, so FY22-23. Now, because of COVID, the GST Council decided to extend it and said that FY26 was going to be the last year of GST compensation cess collection. This was part of this was the most important reason why this GST reform has happened, because this cess was ending and something had to be done with this. So 1.7 lakh crores is a lot of money. So the center and the states had to figure out a way on what to do with the compensation cess. Now, in the last 2 years, the cess was being collected, but there was no mandatory payment of compensation because the promise was only for the first 5 years. And after that, I think this 2 years of extension was because of COVID. But now, all the cess that was collected last year and this year was used to repay the loans taken in the years where the GST cess collection was less than what needed to be paid. So the government had borrowed from the future. It was kind of off balance sheet borrowing. But now, in this year and the previous year, the government has been using these collections to settle those debts or repay those debts. So this money then gets freed up. So now, once the debt is collected, once the debt has been repaid, and you are still collecting 1.7 lakh crores, you have what do you do with this once it ends? So what has happened with compensation cess is that quite a bit of it, nearly all of it, I would say, so everything excluding tobacco, has been subsumed into GST. So what was earlier collected as cess, so for example, let's take mid-sized cars. So earlier the effective duty was 45%, 28% was GST, and 17% was cess. Now the effective rate is 40%. So if you go by the earlier calculation, if 28 was going to 18, effectively the cess equivalent would have been 22, but now all of that is being collected in GST itself. So of that 1.7 lakh crores, in our estimate, about 1 lakh to 1,10,000 crores, 1 to 1.1 trillion rupees will be subsumed into GST itself. About 0.6 trillion rupees is the cess collected on tobacco, where the center hasn't fully hasn't disclosed, and the GST Council hasn't agreed on what exactly will be the mechanism. But it is reasonable to think that in some form or the other, it will still be collected, and it can be used, and it will be shared between the center and the state. So this is the magic that, effectively in the last 2 years, the center was the government was collecting the cess but not spending it because it had to repay the old debt. That money going forward will pay for the, if you remember this number, in the 0.4% point of fiscal stimulus, and therefore the effective borrowing does not need to go up. So this is just to show the end of off-balance sheet debt repayment. This is from the government's own fiscal documents, the budget documents that the government. So with this, I've spoken for about 30 minutes. I've covered, just to summarize, it is a significant simplification. Simplification makes it easier to have compliance. It is a fiscal stimulus. That fiscal stimulus does not result in significant borrowing, which is why the 10-year bond yields, initially there was some confusion, so they did go up for a while. But then finally, when the clarity that I just gave was also given to the market, then that cost also reversed. It is likely that the reduction in rates, the significant reduction in rates, will improve collections. It will also improve the process of formalization, and some very critical sectors like food processing and dairy, which where it is necessary for us to increase investments, can actually get formalized very rapidly because of some of the changes that have been made. So with that, I will stop sharing my slides.